And welcome everyone back to your church of heavy metal. That is Thunderdome Metal Reviews. I am the Reverend Ben Dangerously, drinking a little bit of Russell's Reserve tonight and spilling it all over my phone. With me, as always, are the Dr. David Pizzo and Tracy, the manipulator of avian death, Newport, and our featured artist, Gabe Cooper. Gentlemen, how is everyone doing tonight as we stare into the eyes of the metaphorical goat that is Slipknot's Iowa?
Such a huge goat. I'm drinking Bowman Brothers Pioneer Spirit Virginia bourbon that was secretly made in Kentucky, and I'm doing great. And I'm ready to talk about some really sad fucking people recording an album in dire conditions.
And I am drinking diet green tea mixed berry.
That's because you're the healthy one, Tracy, which says a lot.
I don't know so much about healthy. I don't drink the alcohol that you two consume, or even Gabe consumes.
Yeah, that's right. I'm drinking rye this evening, and I've never been to Iowa, and I'm not sure I want to go.
Has anyone ever really been to Iowa? I mean, I've driven through.
Has anybody ever been to Iowa that wanted to go to Iowa that wasn't a politician?
Like there are 8 people there who would be upset with that statement, Tracy.
I think it's just more of this.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thing. Just numbing sameness. Just whether it's the meth or the piss-soaked basements that bands like this have to practice in, or the sadness. I feel like it's just more of this.
Really selling it, David. Really selling it.
What, America? I don't mean, I'm not talking about Murray. I'm talking about like...
He's on the Iowa board of, what do they call it?
Tourism or whatever.
Tourism. That word that escaped my mind.
Ben's losing it. His pandemic brain. What word did you forget earlier? Scholarship.
Scholarships, yeah.
We're giving out money, yo. I'm like, that's
vacations and scholarships. What are those things? I don't know. Anyway.
Shit. Well, tell us what this album even is, Benjamin.
Well, I think you guys are going to tell me some about what this album actually is.
Oh,
here are the details I have. It is Iowa, released on 8/28 of 2001. Ironically, we are recording this on 8/28 of 2021.
Yes, so we are.
20-year reunion. Happy reunion or birthday, whatever. Slipknot. This is the second studio album. I'm sorry, Tracy. What was that?
I said anniversary. I mean,
yeah, the anniversary is better.
This album is the age of most of my students.
So than some of mine.
It can vote. It can fight in wars. It can buy alcohol and porn.
It can't be alcohol. You have to be 21.
Oh my God!
I can't buy cigarettes anymore either.
Oh, did they change that to 21 as well?
You have to be 21
to buy where you are. I think there are certain states that they could still
Trump passed it in like 2019 to be 21 and older to buy cigarettes.
I'll be damned.
Not all heroes wear capes, Tracy. And it means that I was going to have to flee to fucking Canada to get itself better rye, as well as cigarettes and alcohol.
This was released on Roadrunner and recorded in Sound City Studios and Sound Image, both in Van Nuys, California. Produced by Slipknot and Ross Robinson, so I'm sure that there was some mental and emotional abuse going on in the recording studio.
Count on it.
The runtime is 66 minutes and 19 seconds. Let me take a deep breath before I give you this lineup. Corey Taylor, number 8 on vocals. Mick Thomas, son, on number 7 on guitar. Sean Crahan, number 6, percussion and backing vocals. Craig Jones, number 5, samples. Jim Root, number 4, guitars. Chris Fain, number 3, percussion and backing vocals. Paul Gray, number 2, bass and backing vocals. Joey Jordanson, number 1, drums and additional vocals. And Sid Wilson, number 0, on turntables, and he did the vocals on the track 515. So yeah, Slipknot, Iowa.
Man, this album's fucking pissed.
It is. And I didn't understand why until I read a lot more for today.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because to me, it seemed performatively pissed, and maybe they were actually pissed, but it seemed to me about a bunch of, bored-ass white dudes acting out their rage fantasies. I had the same reaction to this that Tracy has to Marilyn Manson, Antichrist Superstar.
Is that when you first heard it years ago? Or is that currently?
Both. Because in my opinion of it didn't change. I mean, there's some really good songs on it. Don't get me wrong, but it's just like what the fuck are these guys so pissed about? But maybe David's going to tell me, and
I'm going to tell you. It was not great, dude. I will draw here a little bit on, was it Stereo Gum? So Stereo Gum wrote a really cool, relatively short 20-year like birthday piece for this thing. And I just wanted to read a couple of these quotes. So speaking of Marilyn Manson, fuck him, by the way. Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson also played up theatrical ghoulishness. But at the end of the day, Zombie was a Pratt alum, and Manson was a former music writer. Members of Slipknot worked night shifts at gas stations and porn stores, grappled with teenage drug addictions and stints of homelessness, practiced in a basement soundproofed with a pet store carpet that reeked of animal urine, and were hungry to channel their isolation, frustration, and rage into exploding out of Iowa like a post-apocalyptic warhead forged in an abandoned metal shop.
Okay. So my instant reaction to this article, motherfucker, anybody who is in a do-it-yourself music scene in some bullshit ass little town, like the one that I was in, where I worked overnight at fucking gas stations and porn stores, had the same motherfucking experience. These guys aren't special.
I don't think in that regard, and I think what happened to them happened to other bands too. Like they got thrown into the meat grinder of touring way too fast, because remember, they formed and instantly they sold more copies. And on one level, this is like Whamsterdam, but that debut sold more copies than any metal album in history in terms of as like a debut. Faster, that's what it is. Like the speed at which that's what I was reading. Like it is
I guess
crazy.
it depends on how you
it does
metal.
And that was still SoundScan anyway. The point is Metal Archive says it's not metal at all, but anyway, it sold a lot of copies very quickly. They were on tour a ton. They were fucking exhausted. Corey Taylor had mental problems, was cutting himself constantly between recording sessions. Crayan's wife got super ill and almost died, and he wanted to go be with her, and they told him no. So he stayed. Sid Wilson, his grandfather he was really close to, died, and they told him he couldn't leave, and he wailed so badly. That's the intro. Fucking Ross Robinson recorded him like losing his shit, and which is what he did on Korn. So I will not say this is the most adversity a band has ever known. I think something very similar happened with Static X and Machine, and that flip to that recording, both in terms of how brutal shit was and how much they hated each other. Because also at this point, when they moved to LA from Iowa, half of them like went full Motley Crue and just started doing drugs and partying, and the other half hated the half that fucking did so. And so the band, they were super divided. They despised one another. Corey Taylor was having like a nervous breakdown, health issues and deaths in their families, and Ross Robinson just drove them forward like fucking Pharaoh. So that shit is intense. Like, I don't
know, that's super intense, and I agree with that. I mean, that's really shitty behavior, and
it is.
It's easy. So seeing the background that they came from, that's standard. Like,
I think that's pretty standard.
Overcoming adversity stuff, and I, like I said, I think that there is somebody right now who's sleeping on a shit-stained mattress.
100%.
Yeah, in somebody's fucking basement because they have moved to a town to become an artist, and that shit sucks, and I hope they make it out. But the other stuff, agree, that is Ross Robinson level abuse.
It is.
And it's
how the industry works.
It is how the industry works, and it's really easy to be dismissive and just go, well, fucking leave. This is the most money any of them had ever seen at this point.
It was.
To your point, and it stands. They blew up really big, and there was a whole lot of fucking money on the table. And I know motherfuckers who have suffered through a lot worse because they couldn't get off their goddamn job at McDonald's because their grandparent died. So,
for sure.
Anyway,
I think more than anything that I read about this record was just coping with fame and coping with sort of not just the money, but like the popularity and the demands of fans that you can't even anticipate or can't even have any idea about before you're in that situation, confronted with it. And I can imagine it just being way too much psychologically for those guys.
And I want to point out the way they toured was so self-inflictedly, is that an adverb? Brutal. Like that jumping off shit and breaking bones and setting shit on fire thing. It's their own fault. That's the atmosphere they created. They set the bar there, but that meant they did that every night. And so them touring broke them in a way that is, I think, almost Phil Anselmo grade.
That's what I was about to say. Phil Anselmo, G.G. Allen, any of those.
Same.
Yeah. Oh, Trey Azathoth.
Yeah.
I'm going to bleed all over you. Like, he was fucking gushing blood throughout most of this album. Like, what the fuck? That's a thing that happens. Yeah, G.G. Allen, indeed. So and it may have been their fault, they did it themselves, that's the aesthetic they created, but it was a pressure cooker of madness combined with all this, as exactly as Gabe says, fan expectations and money pressures. I will say, to their credit, they did not, almost everyone expected them to turn to more accessible. That was usually the trick. Like, you flip and you get a little more airplay, and they, I'm not going to say Limp Bizkit, but I'm not going to say Limp Bizkit.
Yeah.
Anyway, they absolutely did not do that. Like, the flip from this album, from the previous album to Iowa is, I think, the heaviest album they ever made. I'm not going to say the best. I don't think it is. I think it's actually the worst, maybe. But
I think it's the heaviest album they make by a long shot. And I think the only one I think in my mind that comes close to heaviness is their Chapter 5 one, the one they released after Gray has died, Joey Jordison's issues came up, and he had to leave. And it's honestly surprising because, you hear of bands with 4 or 5 people running into issues like Slipknot did and just falling apart and breaking up. They're doing it with 9 people in the band and somehow maintaining coherency throughout it as well until that 5th album, through really no fault of their own to an extent. But even that, I mean, that's just, for when I first heard this album as a 12, 13-year-old, I'm going to say boy, this was some of the heaviest shit I had ever heard in my life, and I was here for it. And so the story about this album that I have with it, it's one of the albums that got off the BNG Music Club. And it got delivered to my mom's. She picked it up and she saw the explicit lyrics label on it. She's like, huh. So she opens it up and she's like, starts thumbing through it, reading the lyrics. And she looks at me, I want to slit your throat and fuck the wound. Really? And I'm like, oh, I mean, I like it. And she's like, you can't have this. You're not getting it. And so, yeah, she took it and gave it to some guy she worked with who was a metalhead. And I had to find another way of getting this album outside of my mom.
Well, if he was a true metalhead, he would have made you a copy.
But there was no contact between me and him. It was always like mom was the middle person. So
sure, okay, fair enough.
I got this album when it came out. I was older than Tracy. So what was I, 24? I was in grad school. You didn't have to get mama's permission to do it? I did not. I was in grad school. I did not need mama's permission. And I really liked the first album. I bought it when I was living in Europe, and I came back here and I was in grad school. I bought this. I'm like, okay, this is pretty heavy. And I agree. It is, as one critic put it, the heaviest album an arena rock band ever recorded. Like, right? Would you agree with that, Ben? Like, in terms of arena rock, which this is pretty heavy.
I guess they had become that. So yeah, I would, through touring on Ozfest, which was arena shows.
It was arena shows, yeah.
So I do think that this is unmitigatedly heavy. I was surprised by how much it reminded me in ways that the first album didn't necessarily do with Mushroom Head, because I think the sound to the early Mushroom Head is much closer on this album, despite it being heavier than most of Mushroom Head's albums than their first release was.
I can see that. Yeah, I can definitely see it. And I was going to say, if they weren't arena rock by this album, after the next one, Subliminal Versus, and they released it, was it Live 9.0? After they released that album, their live album, they're definitely in that arena rock stratosphere where they're out there with System of a Down as the top band in metal for that running time, at least financially.
No, I would definitely agree with that. That I think that you could make the argument that they already were, but this did push them up another level.
It did, though it briefly fucked them. Ben, this is one of the clearest cases of my theorem that 9/11 briefly made a huge dent in metal, because this album came out 2 weeks before, and they were supposed to do like an event and announce it on September 11th, and after September 11th, a bunch of distributors dropped it. So apparently, you remember you were asking, do we have data? The answer is yes, even if only anecdotal. So this is a case where Screaming Patriot Records read the lyric sheet that Tracy read or whatever. Well, by that, I mean Walmart. And was like, nope, not doing this. So it pushed them, I think among metalheads it did, and it set the foundation for the stuff Tracy's describing, but briefly they took a massive hit, as a lot of metal did. Yeah. That wasn't butt metal, which we'll do an episode on later. So An all 5-finger death punch blast. Anyway, yeah, I think they got hit pretty hard, like Slayer did. Slayer took a huge dig on that too, because there was a lot of promotion on God Hates Us All, the most appropriately titled album ever. I mean, in some ways, those albums were the most appropriate albums for that era. But
well, I mean, even Disturbed got pushed back in around September 11th because of the video Prayer, because it shows the rapture and they're like, oh, all these people died, and oh my god, I can't believe you did this. And you saw it with Drowning Pool and Bodies, and just
I mean, well, it sounds cliche to say that the world changed, but it did. I mean,
it did.
At least the American world changed, and as Americans. But Gabe, you've been sitting there patiently, so
yeah.
No worries. Yeah, so this is my very, very first encounter with Slipknot, my very, very first encounter with this album. And going into it, I was really wondering how it was going to all work, just because, you know, they had this reputation from when I saw, you know, folks wearing their merch around my high school of being kind of a heavy band in some way, some kind of heavy, but also with this, you know, a scariness to it, or like a Disturbed kind of vibe to it. So I was curious how that was going to work out going in. And I was surprised at actually how heavy it was, and also with the amount of groove that it had. Because groovy and scary is not something that you really necessarily associate with one another, but and we could argue about how well that works, that combination works. But the stuff on this album that hits heavy really does hit heavy, and it works for me anyway.
I think most of the stuff works. I will agree with that. I don't think that there's anything in it that was scary, but again, I'm a year older than David, so where I was in 2001 when this came out, and the stuff that I had heard and seen was different. It is certainly, for an arena rock band, if we're going to go with that, even an arena heavy metal band, it is. I don't know. There's just something about it that disconnected with me and made me think that they were all a bunch of tryhards. And maybe it was because of the fact that there were 9 dudes in the band, and maybe it was because of the fact that they wore masks and all the theatrical stuff that they were trying to do, and then also try and be like they're going to beat people up and all this other stuff. And it's like, whatever, theater kid. But there are a lot of things on here that work. And to your point about the groove, I give a lot of the credit to the groove on this, to the fact that there are so many people in the band whose main job is percussion in some way, shape, or form, whether the drummer or the 2 other percussionists and the bass player. I mean, the low end and the rhythm in this band's, well, I mean, this is their second album, and the first album had it too. So far throughout their entire discography, that low end is fucking awesome.
Yes.
It is. It's got this nice chunkiness to it that I think that really adds to their sound. And I want to kind of dip back into where you said, the scariness. As a 12 and 13-year-old listening to this album, seeing the music video for Left Behind was a fucking horrifying video to watch, as the boy working in the pig butcher shop. And like you see him get off the school bus and go and work in the butcher shop. Yeah, it had its moments.
Well, yeah, every millennial I've read, Ben, that listened to this, compared to Korn or Limp Bizkit or whatever else was happening, this was devastatingly terrifying to anyone who didn't have, like you and I had already several inoculations of Slayer and Morbid Angel. Yeah. But if you were coming at this from mallcore or new metal, this was whoa.
And that I completely agree with, because in a lot of ways it still has some of that, and a lot of it probably has to do with Ross Robinson's production, which we kind of already touched on, but channeling that inner angst and pathos from Korn, but in a much more stereotypical metal way than it's, if you get what I'm trying to say there.
The Stereo Gum piece put it as it was the precision and the sort of technicality of 80s metal that was in turn killed by grunge. It was the technicality of that, but with the self-loathing of grunge. That's how he described it, was precisely.
No, I think that's very fair.
Right? So it's always trying to have a cake and eat it too, but it's that author also pointed out that in some ways a bunch of pissed off white people from Iowa, that doesn't slap the same now. in terms of the politics of our current era and, you know, issues of sense of entitlement.
Well,
and,
I mean, it's some of that same shit that we talked about when we talked about with Korn, with
of course,
Columbine and everything. I mean, I'm definitely not saying that metal had anything to do with that, but I think there's a certain sense of alienation that is touched on there that is adjacent to that. And, whether the militias in Iowa or Idaho or all those fuckers who want to make the Pacific Northwest a white homeland, whether they're wearing Slipknot t-shirts or not, I would say that some of them touched into some of the alienation from these
for sure.
albums at the time.
I think you make a good point. As someone also who was in high school when Columbine happened, that had a real impact, and the sense that they didn't want to cultivate any spaces for people to feel like outsiders, which is like an interesting thing because it really doesn't work too well. But anyway, things like they banned trench coats at our school. Which is just also ludicrous. I mean, anybody can wear a trench coat for any number of reasons, but they just, they
banned them at mine as well.
Yeah. But anyway, I think you're onto something there, Ben, also that this spoke to a lot of people for that reason. It sort of had that energy of outsiderness and that sort of self-loathing.
And I think that it also, because there are so fucking many of them in the band, that it also touches into that thing that I think bands that are not metal, but like ICP, I know I mentioned him already with the Bleeding and everything, but G.G. Allen, that sense of an outcast family,
the Maggots,
finding your tribe and all this other stuff. Where
we are not your kind.
Yes, exactly that. So I have sounded like I don't like Slipknot, I think, on this so far. And I actually do like Slipknot. I think there's some really good stuff on here. This was always just this is one of those albums that came out on the cusp of a generational change where I was caught, was like, this doesn't resonate with me the way it does with the people younger than me. And Korn kind of did the same thing, but I was still young enough that I was just on the cusp of that on Korn. But here, I think I was finally over the edge.
Interestingly for me, this is one of my least favorite Slipknot albums. And I was on the ride from the moment one, but I actually prefer Volume 3, and Tracy doesn't agree with me here, but All Hope Is Gone. I was listening to All Hope Is Gone. Hazel thought that was awesome.
I think for me, this is about the middling of their. I think it's just right in the middle about what they release and what I think quality wise. I do have a question for Gabe. Did you mean to make the We Are Not Your Kind?
Yes.
Okay, I was like,
but I think it works, right? I think that, and not because I've listened to all of their records, not by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, this is one of the few bands where I think the slightly more radio-friendly albums I like more. I like 3 and 4 more than this one.
Well, I was going to say, I think the response to September 11th happening and the pushback and everything that happened to them after that, I think directly leads to what happens with 3 and how their writing style changes in that, especially lyrically.
I think also it's clear they don't hate each other nearly as much. There are things that come through on here like they do on Machine. And I felt those things even before having read the things I've read now. This album was always very unsettling to me. Not because it was scary. I listen to a lot of scary shit. But it's just something's wrong here. And having gone back and read, I'm like, oh, is that what was happening? They wanted to kill each other. I feel like that you hear that on albums. And Ross Robinson harnesses that dark energy. I know that's actually his power move. And he does that here. And it's effective in terms of aggression and alienation, as you say, Ben. But I actually think the discipline and just mopping up just the tiniest bit that happens on the next 2 albums makes them better. It's just my opinion.
I would say that it's a healthier way of dealing with because it's not like the issues go away.
They don't.
But anyway, I guess with no objections, we'll move on to talking about some songs.
Fine with that.
So I'll lead off on this one. I think this album is fan-fucking-tastic up to Left Behind. I think after Left Behind, the music on this album it really starts to fall off to the point of I skip the final track on this album. I just can't stand it.
You can't stand the title track, Tracy?
I can't. It's a hot fucking mess.
Isn't that how you
It's-
felt about their first album too? Like it just fell off very sharply at the end.
Yeah, and I think that's a Ross Robinson special of just putting bullshit nonsense at the end of an album. So that so I really enjoy those first 8 tracks. And side note, the first time I ever heard People Equal Shit, it was on one of the TV channels like that used to play music all the time, like on satellite or cable. And they actually mislabeled it, and they said the name of that track was People Eat Bullshit instead of People Equal Shit. So, but yeah, People Equal Shit. My Plague, I fucking love that. It's off the Resident Evil soundtrack as well, and I think it's a great fucking song. Everything Ends, the Heretic Anthem, Left Behind. I even enjoy Gently Enough, that slow down, creepy, like Blair Witchy kind of vibe found to it. But I think them outside of that intro, the tracks 2 through 8 are fantastic. And like not all the ones in the back half are bad, but I don't think they're anywhere as good as the others are.
I think 515 is an abomination of abuse, knowing what I now know. It's another Ross Robinson. And this one fronts the album.
Yeah.
That shit with Jonathan Davis at least was at the end. So you've already been on the ride. Anyway, so that's fucked. People Equal Shit. This was the first time I'd heard it in a while that it wasn't the Richard Cheese version. People Equal Shit. So that's which I love. I am very much on Team Tracy here. I think that arc from People Equal Shit through certainly through Heretic Anthem, I'm not as big a fan of Gently, but I also like Left Behind and maybe The Shape. So I go a little further than Tracy, but not a whole lot. I feel like Skin Ticket, New Abortion, Metabolic Iowa, they're okay, but I think it does drop off and meanders. I think this album, it's their longest album.
It's too long.
It's too long. I think Cutting Iowa would have almost fixed it. Anyway, but I am very much in agreement with Tracy that 2 through 6, but then I would also add 8 and 9 are pretty good. And the songs that are good are good. This album's heavy. It's ferocious. It's in spite of, I feel like it got made in spite of the conditions in which it was produced. But that's my story.
So I didn't like 515 before I knew what it was.
Me neither.
So yeah, I was just like, this is a terrible opener. And I agree with, I don't think Iowa itself is terrible, but it's too fucking long and it meanders, and they could cut half of that or maybe more than half of that and it would be pretty tight. I think the back half of the album is incredibly weak. I'm going to go a little bit even further than David in trimming down what I think the front half of the album is, although I will say that I think I Am Hated is a pretty good track. Behind's okay. But for me, the strength of it is like basically 2 through 5. The Heretic Anthem, sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. That track just really doesn't have a solid resonance in my brain as to what I think about it. It's very dependent on my mood and where I am in the world when I listen to it. But I do think that 2 People Equal Shit, Disaster Piece, My Plague, and Everything Ends are really, really good.
Yeah, I admit when I got this album at the time, I sort of listened to the first half and then kind of skipped it or moved on to something else. I didn't listen to the back half very much.
That's why I didn't buy the album when it came out, is because that was one of the ones that you could go in and sample, you know, when you could do that in a record store and you could like listen to the tracks. And I was like, there are too many tracks on here that I just don't care for. So I didn't purchase it.
Where you at, Gabe?
So I'm surprised that no one said that they liked Metabolic, because it has one of the best lyrics on the entire album, which is, "I'm always ready to die, but you're killing me."
That is a good lyric.
That is a good lyric.
I actually kind of like Metabolic and New Abortion. I think those are pretty good tracks. And I Am Hated is just okay. And Left Behind is technically part of the back half, and I liked that. So I wouldn't say that the back half is super, super weak, but it's not as good as the first bit. And I do like y'all. I was into tracks 2 and 3, and I also really dug Heretic Anthem. But I think Iowa is just like a snooze fest. It's mostly screaming anyway. Even after it picks up, it's not super inventive, but Yeah, just wanted to save the back half just a little bit.
Sure. All right. Well, let's grade this album. I'm going to go first. I'm going to give this a B-. I think it's a solid album, but I think that we have been we may not all agree on the grade, but I think we all agree on the flaws, that it's too long. The second half, although there are some good tracks there, is weaker than the first half. And just the opener and the closer are trauma porn, essentially, for basically, I guess, the producer and the people in the band, because I don't think it was widely known that that's what it was.
That's just special, though. Trauma porn.
No, I know.
He himself had a broken spine while he was recording this shit. So he was like torturing himself too. He shattered it in a motocross accident. Sorry, you were saying.
The more the more we cover Ross Robinson episodes and the shit he did in the studio, the less and less I like the guy.
The more you find out about the music industry and the people who make it, the less you like it.
That's true. Do you not want to meet your heroes, Tracy?
Yeah.
Including
I know.
But there are some really good songs on here. And I mean, it's an album that sold incredibly well and kind of rocketed them into another stratosphere. But with that said, I only think it's a B-, a solid album.
I'll go next. I agree. We're all of a similar mind here. Too long, too much trauma porn. I think the back half hurts it for me. And I think it's just a good album. I'm going to give it a B.
I think I'm going to sidle up right alongside Tracy with a B, because there are a good many tracks on this album that I think are decent. My main problem is I think that I'm not super into groovy here when they're trying to be disturbing, because just it's dissonant for me, or it's like the two don't necessarily work together. I also think that there are some really monotonous moments here where not a lot is going on. It's just repeated. And that doesn't go only for the last track. It also goes for some of the stuff in the middle as well. So just a B.
I'm going to form the third wheel of that tricycle and also give it a B. I think that's where it is, because I think I'm here for the groove, but it isn't always successful in here, I don't think. I think it works a little bit better in some of their other albums. I can tell they all want to kill each other. And it made for an angry album. It's an angry, heavy, scary album, but I probably like it more than 5, I have to say, and I guess we'll be reviewing that too. But other than 5, this is one I by far listen to the least. Some of those other albums I listen to a lot, actually, but this one, I think I could just smell the trauma. I don't know. It's a B. Some people think it's the greatest album in the history of albums. Like, the real fans think this is the best one. I guess.
I like to disagree with them. I disagree hard with them.
I do too. And I love heavy shit, but I still think 3 and 4 better. But we'll be getting to those soon enough. Sorry to give it away. What are we doing next, Tracy?
Next, we are... We've gone through the putridness of Cerebral Rot and the horror that is Iowa, and back to back. And so I felt it was necessary to bring something a little lighthearted and a little less trauma-inducing. And we're going to check out Caligula's Horse in Contact.
I'm looking forward to going to Australia with you. It's Brisbane time.
And I'm looking forward to Ben's reaction to it.
You might be surprised, Tracy.
I might be.
You're probably not going to be, but you might be. But anyway, thank you for listening to Thunderdome Metal Reviews and watching us. Like, share, subscribe, do all the things. Thank you again, Gabe, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for your support in whatever way you give it.